Hi everyone. I'm currently working on my first long-form videos. This channel is not about coin price predictions. The goal of this channel is aiming to cover broader crypto industries in a way that ordinary people can understand easily. The crypto is no longer just an investment asset. Crypto is no longer just about bitcoins. The crypto is becoming the strategic assets for nations. And in particular, the rise or fall of dollar-backed stablecoins is close to the most important battle for the future of the United States. In this upcoming video series, I want to explain why the United States is so focused on dollar stablecoins and why the United States had no choice but to become the global pushover after World War II, and why the United States is now preparing for a new kind of war. The series will be divided into three parts. The part one is Into the Flames. The part two is A New Order. And part three is The Manifest Destiny of 21st Century. I will upload the part one, part two, part three separately. After that, I will upload a full combined version as one complete long-form videos. Then let's start the part one. Even before World War II, including the Pacific War, came to an end on August 14, 1945, the United States already had a vision for the future. And to discuss that future together, it invited leaders from 44 countries around the world. They were invited to the United States. Now, the United States has 50 states. And if you look at the map, up in the northeastern part of the country, there is a state called New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, there is a beautiful resort town with incredible scenery. Even today, a resort still operates there. And it was there that the United States gathered leaders from 44 countries around the world and began discussing the future it had in mind. At that moment, America asked one very simple question. Why did we fight? Or more precisely, why did we fight two world wars? And to put the conclusion first, the answer those countries arrived at was, we fought wars to make money. So what does that mean? Originally, in the 17th and 18th centuries, the purpose of colonies was not only to take things from them, but also to trade with them. It was not simply about taking what the people in the colonies were, what they ate, where they lived, the resources they used, or even the people themselves. But by the 19th century, around the mid to late 1860s, Britain became the first country to successfully industrialize. Then France followed. Before the Industrial Revolution, economies were based on local communities and self-sufficiency. Back then, it was not really about the nation state. It was about the village. Each village already knew roughly what kinds of goods it needed and how much of each. Why? Because they knew from experience. The elders of the village remembered how much they needed last year, how much they needed the year before that, and how much they needed even before that. So based on that memory, they would estimate, we'll probably need about this much this year, and produce accordingly. And if there was anything left over, they would store it or throw it away. And if throwing it away felt like waste, they would barter with nearby villages. That was the kind of era it was. But what does it actually mean for a country to successfully industrialize? It means the economy no longer goes back to that old model of self-sufficiency. Why? Because the main producer of goods was no longer the human being, it was the machine. Machines were created by imitating the way human labor works. Just as humans need to sleep and eat in order to produce energy and work, machines operate by taking in energy sources like coal or oil, converting that energy into motion and then producing movement. In a way, it is similar to how humans today are developing artificial intelligence by imitating the way human thinking works. The machine became the center of labor, and humans were inserted into different stages of that process, almost like parts inside a larger machine. As a side note, socialism partly emerged as a criticism of this very system, a system where human beings had been reduced to components of a machine. And because machines could not manage the entire flow of labor on their own, humans had to manage that process. That is how the idea of the manager began to emerge. A separate role appeared for people who knew how to handle machines while also managing the attendance, discipline, and performance of workers. And through that process, division of labor and bureaucracy became established as part of the social structure. As machines moved into the center of labor, countries became capable of producing far more than human labor alone ever could. But as this industrial revolution began to spread beyond Britain and France to other European countries, trade among European nations alone was no longer enough to absorb this massive volume of goods. If all those overproduced goods were left unsold, product prices would fall, corporate profits would collapse, and in order to defend themselves, companies would start cutting labor costs. That would lead to a surge in unemployment. And as ordinary people lost purchasing power, they would no longer be able to consume. Then corporate profits would fall even further. Companies would start going bankrupt one after another. In other words, the economy would have no choice but to enter a serious deflationary spiral. And that is when the purpose of colonies became even stronger. Colonies became important in two ways. First, they became markets where industrial powers could sell their overproduced goods. And second, they became sources of cheap raw materials that could be imported to produce goods at lower costs. So in the end, successfully industrializing meant that a country would inevitably be pulled into the race for colonies. But according to some research, by 1914, the year World War I broke out, Britain and France controlled somewhere in the high 70% range of the world colonies by land area. Now saying a high 70% range may sound like just a number, but in reality, that was basically a monopoly. So from the perspective of latecomers like the German Empire, the situation looked like this. They had also become rich and powerful through industrialization. So they opened up the map and thinking, now we should build colonies of our own. But when they looked at the world, all the valuable colonies had already been monopolized by Britain and France. Then how could these latecomers secure colonies for themselves? Could they just pay money and buy them from Britain or France? Would those two countries be able to sell their colonies? No, they could not. Think of it in today's terms. If you went to America's big tech companies and said, we'll pay you for your AI foundation models, would they just hand them over? If you went to companies like Samsung Electronics or SK Hynix and said, we'll pay you for the technology to produce HBM, would they give it to you? Of course not, because the moment they give that away, their monopoly position in the market breaks down. These are national assets that cannot simply be sold for money. And what do you do in the end? You take it by force. Because if you're facing the possibility of starving, of course you're going to try to take what you need. That is why countries starting building up their armies. If someone points a gun at your head and threatens to put a hole in it, it becomes very hard to refuse. Then would Britain and France just sit there and watch? Of course not. They also started building up their armies. And as the great powers competed with each other through military expansion, nationalism swept across Europe. Large and small ethnic groups across the continent began fighting, killing each other, and building deeper and deeper resentment. Then, in Sarajevo, a city in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was shot and killed by a young Serbian extremist nationalist. As a result, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a major power, declared war on Serbia, a smaller and weaker country. Russia, which supported Serbia, then stepped in behind Serbia. Then Germany responded by declaring war on both Russia and France. And then Britain declared war on Germany. In this way, one declaration of war led to another, like a chain reaction. And eventually, all of Europe was pulled into the flames